Democratic Party is not a progressive opposition party. It is not. Representative Golden is the only Democrat to vote with Republicans as House passes temporary funding bill. So Representative Jared Golden from Maine has sided with the Republicans when it comes to the temporary funding bill. And he actually positioned that had people went out to vote, then they wouldn't have won and he wouldn't have to appease to that side, right? He said that he's supposed to ensure that the government keeps working. He's not supposed to be an activist. He didn't say these words, but basically. And this is actually what Democrat senators have said when it came to confirming his cabinet picks. This is what Alyssa Sloskin has said from Michigan, who has voted to confirm a good amount of his cabinet picks. That their job is to make sure that the government keeps working with qualified individuals like Mark Rubio, I guess, and not to be activists against the government itself. This is why I see some progressives and Democrats celebrating what my governor, Gavin Newsom, is doing, which he had Charlie Kirk on his first podcast, fanboying over the outright Yahtzee, Charlie Boy, saying his 13-year-old son glorified Charlie Boy, and went ahead and agreed with the criticism that Harris lost because she was for the days and not for Americans. Not a they, but I am transgender American. Those two things can exist. He also found common ground between, the alt-right and Democrats, progressives, which is hating transgender people. He agreed with the alt-right Charlie Boy that, hey, transgender women in female sports is unfair, giving them legitimization and their anti-trans narrative. And you see, it's funny because I've been critical and holding him accountable for being really silent during this administration because all he does is talk about fires. He's Smokey the Bear. And Californians have been like, don't be so critical of our governor. He has a lot to do. Yes, becoming a red pill content creator. And they excuse it, saying, well, he has presidential goals, and he has to appease to the right. So he has to appease to the right by throwing people within our communities, within the progressive reality, under the bus. And people are okay with that because the means justifies the end goal, right? Because that's what Poland thought. That's what Poland thought when they surrendered to the Nazis, because in order to give peace to the majority of Poland, had to allow for the ones who have more power to have control over them. But at that cost, 3 million Jews of the 3.3 million pre-occupation Jews were unalived. And I don't see people asking Polish Jews to be thankful to Poland for handing them over. And the fact there are progressives who are bootlicking him moving to the alt-right, it's unfortunate and it's extremely heartbreaking. At this point, as a Californian, I endorse you disconnecting all support from my governor because he's moving to the alt-right pipeline. He is using his Democrat brand in order to legitimize their narrative and bring it closer to the Democrat side, the progressive side. There's progressives who accept it because initially, maybe they're the ones who actually dislike the trans agenda. They dislike transgender people. So this is their way of being legitimized and their opinion against transgender people. But what this tells me is that we don't have an opposition party. What this tells me is that even when we think we're voting in Democrats, it seems like we're still voting in Republicans. Voting with the Republicans to pass a temporary funding bill, contrary to the fact that it's going to affect the constituents negatively. And that's why, because they see themselves as lawmakers. They already have the great healthcare. They already have the great benefits. They're not going to feel the eggs. They're not going to feel anything that we feel. So they don't care because they have an interest in upholding the status quo. Democrats, as a collective, are not interested in losing the benefits they get with the status quo. They're not interested in dissolving it because that means that their interest is harmed. And this is the thing. It seems like the shortcoming of our constitutional social contract are making it so that we're stuck because obviously the checks and balances are broken. However, the courts keep lying to us, the lawyers keep lying to us, the politicians keep lying to us, saying if you just have hope, if we just convince some Republicans, which is more likely they will convince Democrats than Democrats convincing Republicans, then we can fix this, but we cannot because they are compromised. Their interests are tied together, that of the Democrats who benefit from the stock of defense and that of Republicans who benefit from the stock of defense. And here's the thing, because I feel kind of stuck because I've been pushing Article 5, a convention of the states, not like the one from conventionofstates.org or .com. That's the Republican one, and that's the only one that's on the table. So if your state is deciding on it, please reject that. But Article 5 is the only way in which we can create that constitutional reform that will fix this situation. However, even if we choose the delegate route, right, we do an amendment, say that we're going to clarify Amendment 14, Section 3, so that it's self-executing, and it dissolves what we have, right? So in that reality, we pass it as delegates, right? And then federal Congress gets to decide who ratifies it. Will it be the state legislatures or will it be the delegates? And if they want it to not pass, then they can just go for the state legislatures. And I mean, there's enough red to maybe not pass it. And obviously, there's enough fear in those politicians that they won't vote against their best interest of their handler, right? Which is up there. And then also the oligarchs who have their life in jeopardy. And hey, maybe even some Democrats who are just like, this isn't the way because it is non-traditional. We shouldn't touch the Constitution. I'm not for this. So in that reality, it's not even Democrats versus Republicans. It is we the people versus politicians. And this isn't we the people versus our Constitution. This is we the people versus the politicians who have failed to uphold the Constitution. Politicians who are misaligned with the constitutional duties of their offices. Politicians who refuse to maximize their powers within the Constitution because they don't see themselves as defenders of the Constitution. In this reality, both parties are just ensuring that this authoritarianism becomes successful. And in this very instant, I'm not quite sure what can solve that. Because if our only nuclear option, which is Article 5, is compromised so that federal Congress, which is compromised, can decide whether or not it fails, then what do we have? What do we have? That means that we will have to first change all of Congress, literally refill them with people who aren't the ones who are currently sitting there, apart from the ones who are actually working, AOC, Jasmine Crockett. But ultimately, most of the Democratic Party is useless and actively works against the people. In that reality, what options is there for us? What options is there for us when even our progressive party is interested in upholding the government that currently exists? They do it because they fear much more being deemed as activists within politics than actually defending the Constitution. And that's the thing, because when I talk to voters, and I talk to voters who have moved away from the Democratic Party, it's because they don't have values. It's because they don't fight tooth and nail for their constituents. And they're just showing why. In this reality, while I do not believe that we need to do it right now, because that would be reckless, because whether we like it or not, no matter how critical we are, we have to kind of vote blue. We just have to be more cautious to not vote in Trojan horses. We do need new parties. And I mean new parties because the current Democratic Party is centrist to right. And it seems like the majority of the voters are centrist left or going much more towards the other side, right? And there's a difference even between those two, centrist left and then the other side. I would say I wouldn't consider myself a leftist, even though I have no problem with people calling me a leftist, just because I feel like actual leftists would disagree that I am a leftist, because my alignments are much more constitutional foundation. So now reality, while I accept that there has to be some sort of immigration policy and security, I also accept that I will not accept that reality unless we have humane immigration policy. So the fact we're stuck between a conservative party and a centrist conservative party doesn't benefit anyone. And while that cannot be solved in this very instant, I need us to understand that our channel to our future is not the Democratic Party. And again, I'm not saying vote against it. I'm saying that we have to start building up the parties that will replace what we currently have, because Mexico's president is part of a party that was built on top of a leftist party that was served as neoliberal interests, which is what our Democratic Party is. So we have to build that up so that we're no longer stuck in this cowardice of a Democratic Party.